Hey everybody, this is Joe. Welcome back to my little home office area here where we are discussing the Cisco ICND1 100-101 blueprint and kind of going over things section by section. If you missed the first video, we covered section 1 of the blueprint. Here we're continuing on with section 2. We're going to do a section per video. So let's hit LAN Switching Technologies. 2.1 here, kind of a loaded one. They say determine the technology and media access control. Remember that phrasing, media access control, very important. Method for Ethernet networks. So let's take it one step at a time. Determine the technology for Ethernet networks. This is basically telling you need all the book knowledge about Ethernet. Okay, so where do you start? You're going to go all the way back to the beginning with the more legacy Ethernet technologies. So way back when things originated with everything on a shared bus topology, right? The old thin net and thick net, or 10 base 2 and 10 base 5. You're going to want to know all the different standards, how Ethernet sort of evolved into a star topology using hubs and switches, the different standards for Ethernet. So of course IEEE 802.3 defines Ethernet, but that standard's evolved over the years. So for example, 802.3 U defines fast Ethernet, or basically Ethernet running at 100 meg over copper. 802.3Z would be gigabit Ethernet running over fiber optic type media. So you're going to want to understand all those different standards. You're also going to want to understand things like the fields in the Ethernet header and what they're used for. You're going to want to understand that Ethernet, at least in the IEEE variant, is broken down into two different sublayers, MAC and LLC, and what those different layers do. All these sorts of theoretical book knowledge things you're going to need to know about Ethernet. Kind of moving through there, types of Ethernet cabling, unshielded twisted pair, shielded twisted pair, pinouts, things of that nature. Again, very theoretical book type knowledge. What about Ethernet addressing, like MAC addresses? How many bytes maybe are in a MAC address? How is a MAC address separated? Things of that nature. Again, how does the addressing work? Things like framing, all those sorts of things. Now, the media access control part of 2.1 here is specifically going to be talking about CSMA-CD, or Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Detection, which I know that's a mouthful, but if you read up on it, basically it means don't talk while others are talking. If you think back to the original Ethernet, when every device on the Ethernet was literally sharing the same piece of wire, or the same bus, they had to figure out a way so that if two machines started talking at the same time on that shared medium, there'd be a way to detect that and manage that, because you didn't want two machines talking at the same time on the same wire. It could cause, corruption of packets and general problems. So CSMA-CD was the answer for that and how they solved that problem. You're going to want to understand how that, I don't want to say protocol, but how that process works. What are the steps to CSMA-CD and how does that operate? So that's pretty much 2.1. There is a lot going on there, pretty much everything to do with Ethernet theory. Moving on to switching concepts, basically what we're saying here with collision domains and broadcast domains, we just need to know what those things are. So again, this video is not to cover the really in-depth technology here. It's just to cover more what we need to know. In short, a collision domain just means it's an area of a network where collisions are possible. Okay, a broadcast domain is an area of a network that's going to receive broadcast frames. Okay, that's about as in-depth as we're going to go right now, but you need to know those. And I would also add, you need to be able to look at a network diagram that has a bunch of routers, bunch of switches, bunch of PCs, and you need to be able to identify where are the broadcast domains, where are the collision domains, and be able to number them. In other words, if you look at a diagram, how many collision domains are there? How many broadcast domains? Make sure you know those. As far as ways to switch, I think there's actually a typo here on the blueprint. You can see here they've got 2.2 store and 2.2 forward. That doesn't make any sense, okay, because store and forward is one thing, not two. So in other words, you've got a switching method called store and forward, not two separate things. So make sure you know store and forward, cut through, and I would also add onto that list fragment-free switching. So these are different methodologies for how we actually move frames through a switch. Generally, it has to do with how much time are we going to take, or how much of the frame are we actually going to read and store in memory before we go ahead and start forwarding it off. You're going to want to know those and generally know what a CAM table is, which is really just a fancy word for the MAC address table. Okay, content accessible memory. Again, just a fancy word for the MAC address table. Understand what the MAC address table is, in that it's basically a database where the switch is learning MAC addresses. Okay, so that's our 2.2c. Now moving into 2.3, this is what I like to call easy points. Absolutely no excuse to miss points on these topics. This is telling you here exactly what you need to know how to configure on a Cisco switch in this section, and they even basically give you the commands for most of them. So make sure every single one of these should be something you've done on an actual switch 100 times. Okay, this should be, you know it so well you could do it in your sleep. Do not miss points for easy commands where they come right out and tell you exactly what you need to know. So know how to set the host name, management IP address on a switch. They're talking about generally an ICND1 VLAN 1, right? So interface VLAN 1, IP address 10.10.10.10, 255.255.255.0, no shutdown, that's about it. How to set the default gateway on a switch, you're going to use the IP default gateway command. How to add a local username and password. So username Joe, password Cisco. Enable secret, and then whatever you want the enable password to be. How do you set up your console and telnet? Things like passwords. How do you log into the device remotely? Setting the timeout of those sessions. Service password encryption is going to encrypt any plain text passwords you have in your config. And finally, copy run start is how you save your running config into the startup config. So you're going to want to know every single one of those. If you don't have experience with them now, make sure that you know those and you go through them before the exam. 2.4 is basically saying know how to use the basic troubleshooting utilities we have here. So ping, telnet, and SSH. I would say know how to use it from a Windows machine, even a Linux machine, and a Cisco router. Okay, so these are all basic utilities. I would also add, you're going to want to make sure you know how to set up telnet and SSH on the switch or on the router itself. So how do you configure your router so that you can remotely access it through telnet or SSH? Finally, we've got 2.5 describing VLANs. This is basically saying we need to know the theory of VLANs, so virtual local area networks. Essentially, we need to understand that VLANs separate broadcast domains, or they separate different routed networks. And if we want to get from one VLAN to another, we need a router in between there, right? So if I want to pass traffic from VLAN A to VLAN B, I need to go through a router or a layer 3 switch. Okay, we also need to know how to actually configure them. Notice on the blueprint, whenever it says configure actually in the topic, like here, configure VLANs, up here, configure and verify, that's a dead giveaway that you need to know how to actually do that particular thing. So here, it's saying describe VLANs, describe this, that, and the other thing. When it says configure, though, that means you need to know how to actually do it at the command line. Okay, so know how to create a VLAN, how to name a VLAN, how to assign a VLAN to a port. And then finally, we've got 2.7 trunking. This is going to be all about how do we configure a VLAN trunk between two Cisco switches. Okay, then we get into DTP and auto negotiation when we configure our trunks. There's many different modes, right? We've got switch port mode trunk. We've got switch port mode dynamic desirable, switch port mode dynamic auto, which gets into DTP. So DTP is basically a protocol that helps us auto negotiate trunks. Okay, and there's a couple different ways we can do it. We want to know those ways. That's about it here for section 2 of the blueprint for our LAN switching technologies. Thanks everybody for watching. Leave me a comment here and let me know what area of section 2 you're working on, which areas you've been working through, maybe which areas you've struggled with, where you might need some help, and I'll be glad to try to help you guys out there. If you like the videos, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Follow me over on Twitter at jastorino, and check out my blog over at astorinonetworks.com. If you guys like these videos on the blueprint analysis, I'm going to keep going. Just let me know, leave me some comments, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks everybody for watching.